Today, we're talking about Cyclone Ditwah. And this was so much more than just a weather event. It was a full-blown catastrophe. We're going to trace its path of destruction, look at the heartbreaking human cost, and see how an entire region had to mobilize in its wake. Let's dive in.
To really get a sense of the scale here, you have to start with this number, right here. In Sri Lanka alone, 334 people lost their lives. And that was just the official count. Hundreds more were still missing. This isn't just some statistic, It's a profound human disaster, and that's the lens we need to see everything else through. So, how does a storm like this even happen? I mean, to really grasp the devastation, we have to go back to the very beginning and see how Cyclone Ditwah even formed and how it got so powerful so incredibly fast.
Okay, just look at how quickly this all went down. It forms on November 26th. Literally a day or two later, it slams into Sri Lanka, just unleashing its full force. And before the week is even over, it's already bearing down on India. The sheer speed of this thing is a huge part of the story.
And that takes us right to the epicenter of this catastrophe, Sri Lanka. What happened on the ground there is just staggering. It's hard to wrap your head around, really, both in the numbers and the human stories. So, beyond the tragic loss of life, the sheer number of people impacted is mind-boggling. Almost 310,000 people. We're talking about tens of thousands of families whose homes were destroyed, whose lives were just completely turned upside down in a matter of hours. And this is a perfect illustration of how the disaster just spiraled out of control. It wasn't just one thing. First, you get this absolutely extreme rainfall, up to 400 millimeters. That triggers this devastating chain reaction. You get massive landslides that literally bury entire villages. Rivers and dams just couldn't handle it. So then the roads and railways get washed out, cutting people off from help. It was a total cascading failure that just paralyzed the nation. The situation got so bad, so fast, that the government had to declare a nationwide state of emergency. And that tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't just a local disaster anymore. It was a full-on national crisis that needed the military, that needed every single resource they had for rescue and relief. So as the storm keeps moving north, the story shifts. While Sri Lanka is dealing with the terrible aftermath, its neighbor, India, is staring down the barrel, preparing for impact. This part of the story is all about readiness. And this is where things get really interesting. Look at the contrast here. On the left, you see all the proactive steps India took. Alerts went out, flights were canceled, schools closed down. On the right, you still see the damage. Tragically, there were still fatalities and a real impact on the ground. But this comparison tells such a powerful story about how preparation, even though it can't stop the storm, can absolutely change the outcome. Okay, so we've seen the devastation and we've seen the preparation, and that raises a really important question. Why does this specific cyclone matter in the big picture? What are the real lessons here? It really breaks down into 4 key things. First, the obvious, a massive humanitarian crisis that left deep scars. Second, a huge economic shock, especially for people in agriculture and fishing whose livelihoods were just washed away. But bigger than that, Ditwah was a stark warning, right? A sign that these climate events are getting more intense. And finally, it was a real test of regional cooperation, forcing everyone to ask, how do we help our neighbors when a crisis hits? And that leads us perfectly into the response. Because in the face of all this destruction, the focus immediately shifted to aid, to rescue, and to a sense of regional solidarity. And a huge part of that response was something called Operation Sagar Bandhu. This was India's immediate and pretty comprehensive relief mission for Sri Lanka. And we're not just talking about dropping off supplies from a plane. This meant sending in actual rescue teams, providing direct, on-the-ground support. It's a really powerful example of neighbors stepping up when it matters most. Which brings us to this final, really critical question. After seeing the absolute devastation in one place and the intense preparation in another, we have to look ahead. If these powerful storms are becoming the new normal, then the challenge isn't just about how we respond after the fact, but about how we build for this new reality. So what does true resilience really look like for all of us?